Viets were the worst. You tell them to be your vassal. They nod, smile, and say, "Of course, mighty Khan," and then turn right around and do whatever they want. They swore loyalty, submitted to Mongol rule, and sent tribute every year. But the king never personally showed up to the Yuan court. Instead, they sent the king's uncle to bow before the court. So the Mongols said, "All right, fine. Your uncle's in charge now." And what did the Viets do? They killed him. Okay, so the Mongols tried again, sent another guy to be king. They rejected him too. Then when the Mongol army marched through on their way to attack Champa and said, "Hey, be a good vassal and supply us," the Viets just didn't. No rice, no horses, not even a single bag of sad, dried fish. Kublai Khan was done with their nonsense. He had conquered China, Korea, and most of Central Asia, empires that actually mattered. And yet this tiny jungle kingdom was acting like it had a choice in the matter. At this point, Kublai basically said, "You want to do this the hard way? Fine, we're doing this the hard way." And just like that, the 1287 invasion of Dai Viet was on. How did it all go down? Subscribe and help us hit 17,000. We've got the whole dramatic, action-packed waiting for you. The Mongols walked into Dai Viet thinking it was going to be an easy conquest, like taking candy from a baby. Except the baby turned out to be a battle-hardened warrior with a grudge, a spear, and a well-laid ambush plan. The 1285 invasion was a total disaster. Tens of thousands of Mongol troops, many of them elite warriors, never made it home. The jungles of Dai Viet turned into their final resting place. Even some of the Yuan dynasty's best generals weren't spared, and met their end at the hands of Vietnamese forces. For Kublai Khan, this was a bitter pill to swallow. This second invasion into Dai Viet had been meticulously planned in 27 years. Since the first time in 1258, resources had been poured in, and yet Dai Viet sent his forces packing again. But let's be real, was this the end of the Mongols? Not even close. Because despite the humiliating defeat in Dai Viet, the Yuan Empire was still flexing harder than ever. Kublai Khan's rule marked the peak of Mongol dominance, and his empire wasn't just about smashing cities and collecting tribute. It was a full-fledged imperial makeover. This was an empire so massive that you could ride a horse from Korea to Hungary without ever leaving Mongol-controlled territory. Across Eurasia, the other Mongol khanates formed a kind of empire-wide buddy system, each Khan watching the other's back. The Yuan had absorbed the best of the empires they had conquered, Jin, Song, Khwarezm, and were using their advanced technology, governance systems, and culture to tighten their grip on power. With that kind of setup, the Yuan dynasty wasn't too concerned about defense. They were all about offense. Losing Dai Viet stung. The wounds from that humiliating defeat hadn't even stopped bleeding before he was already scheming his comeback tour. Even as Prince Togan, aka the guy who ran for his life, was still scrambling to escape Dai Viet, the Mongols were already moving pieces on the board. On July 9th, 1285, the Tran kings finally returned to Thonglong after their hard-fought victory. By August 21st, the Yuan dynasty's top brass were already holding war councils, plotting a do-over invasion for later that year. The plan was to gather what was left of their battered troops, patch them up, and double down. They called in reinforcements, Mongol cavalry from the north, Chinese infantry, plus some fresh conscripts from southern China. By November 1285, the Mongol war machine would be back in motion, assembling at Hunan, gearing up for yet another round with Dai Viet. The Mongols were back at it again. Togan and Arik Kwadai were still in charge, and the plan was simple: hit Dai Viet before they had a chance to recover from the last invasion. But even the great Khan had to be practical. His generals had barely escaped Dai Viet with their heads attached, and they knew firsthand that this wasn't some easy pushover war. So when one particularly nervous general hesitantly raised his hand and muttered, maybe we let the army rest first," Kublai actually listened. The invasion was postponed until next year to give them time to regroup and prepare, and this was the first delay. Count with me. By 1286, Kublai Khan had a tough choice to make. See, the Mongols had been obsessed with invading Japan, but after 2 failed attempts, thanks to the infamous kamikaze storms that sent their fleets to a watery grave, had to admit that maybe, just maybe, Japan wasn't the easiest target. So what did he do instead? Redirect the rage. Kublai even found a handy excuse. When Tran forces pursued the retreating Toghan and accidentally trampled over some border towns, Kublai seized the moment. "See? They attacked us first. We're just defending ourselves." By March 1286, the Mongols had their invasion lineup ready to go. Toghan, the guy who had already taken a humiliating loss in Dai Viet and was now back for a redemption arc. His strategy team included a cast of familiar names: Arik Kaya, basically the offensive coordinator, Ayurutsi, the enforcer, and Omar, the wild card who had very bad memories of Dai Viet's battlefields, but somehow got roped into another round. Then Arik Kaya fell sick and died. So, in classic Mongol fashion, they just shuffled the roster and moved Ayurutsi up the ranks. No time for sentimentality when there's an invasion to plan. Troops were pulled from all over the empire, but particularly from the southern regions closest to Dai Viet. Meanwhile, shipyards were working overtime, cranking out fresh warships. The plan was to meet up in Yongzhou and Qinzhou by late autumn, then march right into Dai Viet. Meanwhile, from the west, Asar Timur in Yuan was getting his own forces prepped to hit Dai Viet from another angle. This was going to be the one. The Mongols had fresh troops, a whole new battle plan, and even a puppet king lined up. It was time to roll. Until... The timing couldn't have been worse. Down south, in the less-than-happy corners of the Yuan Empire, people were getting real tired of Kublai Khan's constant war, constant taxes policy. Forced labor, conscription, and tax collection had pushed the population to the brink. The farmers had abandoned their fields. The poor were literally selling their own kids just to survive. And the rich were pawning off their homes just to pay these ridiculous war taxes. Peasants who had nothing left to lose were grabbing whatever they could use as a weapon and revolting. The Mongol army was still powerful enough to keep the lid on these uprisings. But let's just say, morale was not great. And when morale isn't great, organizing a full-scale invasion becomes a logistical nightmare. We're looking at mobilizing hundreds of thousands of men and burning through mountains of gold. Even some Yuan officials, who weren't exactly known for their soft hearts, began sympathizing with the suffering population and dared to suggest that Kublai Khan slow down the invasion prep. After all, Dai Viet technically still sends tribute and calls itself a vassal. Instead of steamrolling them immediately, how about we take a beat? Give the people a break, lower the taxes, stockpile food, and wait for a year when things aren't falling apart. Kublai wasn't heartful, but let's not pretend he was about to start a charity either. He didn't suddenly develop a love for peace. He was just practical. Conquering new lands sounded great, but only if you actually had the resources to do it. So after some grumbling, he reluctantly agreed. Fine. No war, for now. The sword went back in the sheath. The invasion was paused. Again. Are you still counting? That was invasion attempt number 2. Fast forward to late 1286, and suddenly, the war machine was back in full swing. Kublai had his eye on Dai Viet again, and this time, he wasn't playing around. More troops, more horses, more generals with names that sounded straight out of an epic war movie. The army he assembled was massive, 300,000 strong. That was enough soldiers to fill an entire modern-day stadium 3 times over. He's got Mongol cavalry, Chinese infantry, warriors from Yunnan, troops from Hainan, even some Zhuang fighters from Guangxi. If at first you don't succeed, invade again, but with better logistics. That seemed to have been the Mongol Empire's motto when they decided to take another swing at Dai Viet in 1287. After their last attempt had ended in a logistical nightmare, they came back upgraded. This time with a beefed-up navy, a more balanced army, and most importantly, a better food supply. Because, as every good commander knew, an army marched on its stomach, and nothing killed morale faster than realizing you had forgotten to pack lunch. So, what was the new and improved game plan? A brand new turbocharged Mongol navy. 2 fleets, each with its own job. First up, the supply fleet commanded by Zhang Wenhu. His mission was transport up to 700,000 chi of grain. In case you're not up to date on your medieval grain-to-pound conversions, that's about 230 million pounds of food. Yes, million. Then came the battle fleet under the command of the formidable Omar, and oh boy, was this fleet stacked. Over 600 warships, thousands of elite marines, and a mixed bag of troops, including warriors from Hainan and Jingnan, because nothing says diverse workplace like a multinational invasion force. Omar's job was to clear the way for the supply ships, and ideally crush Dai Viet's navy so thoroughly that future historians had nothing to write about, except how unstoppable the Mongols were. By late autumn 1287, everything was in place. The Mongol war machine was split into 3 main forces. Toghan, the commander-in-chief, set up shop in Guangxi, leading the main invasion force. Meanwhile, the Yunnan-based army under Aruk was positioned to provide backup. And finally, Omar and Zhang Wenhu's navy gathered at Qinzhou, ready to sail down and make waves, literally. But even with all these improvements, Kublai Khan still wasn't feeling totally confident. In one of those classic last words before a terrible idea moments, he issued a final warning to his generals. Don't underestimate Jiaoqi just because it's small. Why Jiaoqi? Jiaoqi was the name for northern Vietnam, back when the Han Dynasty first waltzed in during the 2nd century BC. It stuck around like that one nickname from high school that you can't shake, no matter how much you outgrow it. Even when the Vietnamese won their independence, Chinese states kept calling them Jiaoqi out of sheer habit. And when the Mongols showed up, well, they were busy adopting all kinds of Chinese administrative and geographical lingo after Kublai Khan set up the Yuan dynasty, so of course they kept the old-school terminology. Basically, the Mongols saw themselves as the latest rulers in a long line of Chinese empires, so they just went with the classic branding. So, how about the situation on the Dai Viet side? Winning didn't mean Dai Viet got off easy. Every village the Mongols had stomped through looked like a set piece from a post-apocalyptic movie. Crops, burned, homes, razed, people exhausted. And just as they were catching their breath, they had to brace for yet another round with the biggest empire on Earth. By mid-1285, after the smoke cleared and the last Mongol stragglers had either fled or met a less than pleasant fate, it was time to bring back some sense of normalcy. Emperor Tran Nan Tong and his father, the retired Emperor Tran Than Tong, made their grand return to Thang Long, modern-day Hanoi. It was like the ultimate homecoming parade, except instead of confetti, there were still a few lingering war wounds, and instead of marching bands, you had weary soldiers and displaced villagers trying to pick up the pieces. What do you do after surviving an invasion? You throw a massive awards ceremony, obviously. The Tran court got to work handing out honors to the brave souls who had risked life and limb for the kingdom. Instead of golden statues, the rewards were land, titles, and maybe a lifetime supply of rice. Of course, not everyone got to bask in the glory. Some folks had, let's say, underperformed in the war effort. A nice way of saying they chickened out and joined the enemy. Those guys got what was coming to them, though. But here's where Tran Han Tong really showed his class. Instead of ruling with an iron fist after such a brutal war, he issued a royal pardon for the people, basically giving the entire country a clean slate. War had hit everyone hard. Why make things worse with harsh punishments? It was a rare moment of mercy in a time when rulers weren't exactly known for their soft spots. With the chaos settling down, Emperor Tran Nun Tong figured it was time for a little spring cleaning. And by that, I mean he ordered a nationwide census. The court officials, probably already exhausted from trying to keep the kingdom from falling apart, collectively groaned and said, Your Majesty, maybe now isn't the best time? People are kind of busy, you know, rebuilding their lives. But Nan Tong wasn't having it. He basically hit them with, if not now, when? We need to see how much damage we took so we can fix it. The officials, realizing he had a point, sighed and got to work. Cue a kingdom-wide headcount. Suddenly, every village was bustling with scribes and officials, trying to tally up who was still around, who had disappeared, and who owed taxes. Historians have debated whether this was a genius move or just one more bureaucratic headache. On the plus side, it helped the government get back on its feet, reorganizing tax collection, labor duties, and military resources. On the downside, medieval administration was about as smooth as a cart with square wheels. So there were definitely some logistical nightmares involved. But overall, it seemed to work out. The fields were being farmed again, the markets and ports were buzzing with life, and the kingdom was rising from the ashes of war. Tran Nan Tong had set the stage for Dai Viet's next chapter, hopefully one with fewer Mongol invasions. When it came to dealing with the Mongols, the Tran dynasty took a different approach. Dai Viet wasted no time sending envoys to the Yuan court, bearing gifts and a very polite, "Oops, our bad" letter. This wasn't exactly an apology, but more like that thing where you send someone a nice fruit basket after an argument. Not because you think you're wrong, but because you'd rather not deal with more drama. More than that, early in 1286, Dai Viet voluntarily released 50,000 Mongol prisoners. This wasn't just an act of mercy. It was a clear message. See? We're reasonable people. Can we just move on now? Unfortunately, the Mongols weren't really in a let's move on kind of mood. Kublai Khan, who never took a loss lightly, sent an envoy to politely remind Dai Viet that, oh, by the way, they still wanted to install a Mongol governor to oversee the country. That's like someone breaking into your house, getting kicked out, and then coming back to ask if they can at least keep a spare key. Unsurprisingly, the Tran court wasn't having any of it. Dai Viet had fought tooth and nail to remain independent, and they weren't about to sign it all away over some diplomatic niceties. If the Mongols wanted Dai Viet, they were going to have to take it the hard way. They politely declined the offer, which in Mongol terms wasn't exactly letting bygones be bygones. Nope, Kublai Khan was at it again, gearing up for yet another invasion. Imagine you're Tran Nan Tong. You just fought off 2 Mongol invasions, your people are finally getting a break, and then, bam! Word comes in that the Mongols are sharpening their swords and flexing their muscles again. At this point, you'd be forgiven for thinking, seriously? Do they not have anything better to do? Sensing trouble, the king summoned Tran Quoc Tuan, his best general, and said, All right, level with me. What are we dealing with? Tran Quoc Tuan, ever the battle-hardened warlord, didn't flinch. He basically gave a been-there-done-that speech, breaking it down like this. The people of Dai Viet had been chilling in peacetime for a while, so when the Mongols first invaded, some panicked and fled. Can't blame them. Mongol invasions weren't exactly known for their gentle touch. But thanks to the legacy of their ancestors and the king's strong leadership, they pulled themselves together and sent the invaders packing. Well, now they were ready. The army had battle experience. The Mongols were probably exhausted from their previous failures, and morale was clearly not on their side. If the Yuan forces tried again, it wasn't going to be a repeat of last time. It was going to be worse for them. King Tran Nan Tong asked Tran Quoc Tuan a very reasonable question. So, how bad is it this time? Tran Quoc Tuan, cool as ever, just shrugged and said, "Hey, this year's fight should be pretty chill." In other words, Tran Quoc Tuan was saying, "Don't worry, we got this." Actually, he had a point. After the brutal battles of 1285, the people of Dai Viet weren't just survivors. They had been forged into a nation of warriors. You know how some say, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger"? Well, the Mongols had definitely not killed Dai Viet, and now the country was stronger than ever. Just because things looked good on paper didn't mean they could afford to relax. The Mongols were persistent. They'd be back, and everyone knew it. So the Tran court wasn't about to get cocky. Instead, they doubled down on preparations. Tran Quoc Tuan wasted no time. He called up the nobles and warlords, cracked his knuckles, and got to work. The orders went out fast and furious. More soldiers' recruitment was in full swing. More weapons smiths worked overtime, probably muttering "not these guys again" under their breath. More ships, because when you live in a country full of rivers, lakes, and coastline, controlling the water is half the battle. More training, because if you're going to go toe-to-toe with the Mongols, you'd better be ready to run, hide, ambush, and repeat. Meanwhile, the border defenses were reinforced. The mountain passes, fortified. The northeastern ports, guarded. In the frosty early days of 1286, Tran Quoc Tuan decided it was time for a grand military inspection. He had a serious mission, making sure the new recruits weren't just enthusiastic farm boys, but battle-ready warriors. And guess what? They passed the test. The army was looking sharp. More soldiers? Sure, let's just throw 100,000 farmers into battle and see how that goes, he said, probably with an eye roll. He wasn't impressed by sheer numbers. In his book, quality beat quantity any day. After all, what was the point of having an army as big as a rice field if they fought like a bunch of headless chickens? Plus, more troops meant more mouths to feed, more logistics to manage, and a whole lot more headaches. Better to have a smaller, highly trained force that could move quickly and strike hard. This wasn't just a passing thought, it was the entire philosophy behind Dai Viet's military strategy under the Tran dynasty. But there was a problem. The Mongols were gearing up with a powerful navy, and Dai Viet was not about to let them have all the fun at sea. So, beefing up coastal defenses became the new priority. Tran Khan Du, seasoned general, battlefield mastermind, and, as we'll soon see, an opportunist with a keen eye for business. Tran Quoc Tuan handed him command of the northeast coast, particularly the key port of Van Don. Alongside him was Tran Tuan, a fellow military leader, and together they braced for the inevitable clash with the Mongol fleet. By 1287, war preparations had reached a fever pitch. The Mongols weren't even trying to hide their intentions anymore. Their forces were massing, supply lines were forming, and Dai Viet's leaders were making sure their fallback positions, Long Hung, Tien Truong, Truong Yen, were ready in case things went south. Meanwhile, the common folk, who had barely caught a break from the last invasion, were already back to stockpiling food, sharpening whatever weapons they had, and making plans to evacuate if necessary. Tran Khandu also implemented a clever security measure, ordering all locals to wear a specific type of straw hat, the Malloy hat, so they wouldn't be mistaken for enemy spies in the chaos. Smart move, right? Well, it would have been if he hadn't immediately seen dollar signs and started a nice little side hustle. His inner entrepreneur kicked in, and he arranged for his family to hoard the hats, drive up prices, and then sell them back to the desperate public at a premium. Classic supply and demand maneuver. Was this ethical? Absolutely not. Did it earn him a stern talking to from the retired emperor, Tran Than Tong? You bet. The royal reprimand was swift, and historians have not been kind to him for this little stunt. But let's be real. Khandu was just too good at his actual job, so he got off with a slap on the wrist. When your homeland is hanging by a thread, even a scheming businessman general is better than no general at all. And that, my friends, is where we hit pause, for now. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that war is never just a one-and-done deal. Plans unravel, bad decisions get made, and somewhere, a general is probably questioning all of his life choices. Soon enough, Dai Viet was about to face some surprises. If you're as hooked as a medieval commander on the idea of expansion, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this wild ride. And hey, drop a comment. See you in the next one.